The first time I saw strangers in my pool, I honestly thought they had the wrong house. That's how casual they were about it. Music playing, towels spread out across my patio furniture, somebody floating on one of those giant pink flamingos like they paid the mortgage there. And right in the middle of it all was this woman named Candace Mercer, sunglasses on, drink in her hand, laughing like she owned the place. I remember just standing there in my kitchen holding a grocery bag, staring through the window thinking, there is no way this is actually happening. Now, to understand why this whole thing got as ugly as it did, you gotta understand the neighborhood a little bit. I live in a gated community outside Scottsdale, Arizona, one of those HOA-heavy neighborhoods where people care way too much about mailbox colors and lawn edges. Nice place overall, quiet mostly, retirees, young families, a few remote workers like me. I bought the house after my divorce because I wanted peace. That was the whole goal. Peace, privacy, and enough distance from everybody else that I could sit by my pool at night without hearing somebody scream at their husband over tequila. For the first 6 months, it was exactly that. Quiet mornings, grilling on weekends, maybe a beer in the pool after work. Nothing dramatic. Then Candace moved in 3 houses down. You ever meet somebody who walks into every room like the world's already been waiting for them? That was Candace. Early 40s maybe, always overdressed for no reason, giant white SUV, Bluetooth headset permanently attached to her ear, like she was negotiating hostage situations all day. She joined the HOA board within 2 months of moving in, which honestly should have been my first warning sign. At first, she was just annoying in the regular neighborhood way, complaining about trash bins being visible from the street, measuring fence heights, posting passive-aggressive updates in the community Facebook group. One time she made an entire post because somebody's wind chimes were creating emotional stress during afternoon hours. I wish I was joking, but then things started getting weird. See, my house sits on the corner near one of the walking paths, and because my backyard slopes slightly upward, you can actually see part of the pool from the sidewalk if you look through the iron fencing. Apparently, Candace had decided my backyard looked like a resort she deserved access to. The first time she used the pool, I wasn't even home. I found out because my neighbor Luis texted me. "Hey man," he wrote, "you having people over?" I said no. Then he sends me a blurry photo from across the street. 3 women in my pool. One of them was definitely Candace. I figured maybe there was some misunderstanding. Maybe somebody gave her the wrong address for a party or something stupid like that. So I walked down to her house later that evening and knocked on the door. She answered holding a wine glass. Before I could even finish my sentence, she smiled and said, "Oh my God, that was your house? Your backyard looked empty." I kinda laughed because the alternative was getting angry immediately. I said, "Yeah, it's definitely my house." And she just shrugged. Honestly, you should take it as a compliment. You have a beautiful pool. That should have been the end of it. Awkward misunderstanding, weird neighbor, move on with life. Except it wasn't. About 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time I came home while they were there. I pulled into my driveway and immediately heard music coming from the backyard. Not loud enough to alert the whole neighborhood, just loud enough that somebody clearly felt comfortable being there. I walked through the side gate, and there they were again. Candace and 4 of her friends. Drinks everywhere. Wet footprints across my patio. Somebody had moved my outdoor speakers. One woman was literally eating fruit out of a bowl from my kitchen because apparently they'd gone inside too. The craziest part? Nobody acted embarrassed. Candace looked at me like I'd interrupted her afternoon. "Oh good," she said, "you're home." I remember blinking at her like my brain couldn't process the audacity. "What are you doing?" She laughed a little and gestured around like the answer was obvious. "Relax, we were just cooling off." One of her friends actually waved at me. I said, "This isn't a community pool." Candace took a sip of her drink and said, "Well, technically your gate was unlocked." That sentence still irritates me to this day because of how calmly she said it, like unlocked automatically meant public property. I told them to leave. Politely at first, then less politely. Eventually they gathered their stuff. But Candace moved slow on purpose, like she wanted me to know she wasn't intimidated. Before leaving, she stopped near the gate and looked back at me. "You know," she said, "you'd probably enjoy life more if you loosened up a little." Then she smiled and left. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was scared, more because I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. The entitlement. The disrespect. The weird confidence she had walking through somebody else's home like boundaries simply didn't apply to her. And here's the thing nobody tells you about people like that. If you let one thing slide, they interpret it as permission. Over the next month, little signs started showing up that she'd been back when I wasn't home. Patio chairs moved. Empty drink cans in the outdoor trash. Once I found a wet towel draped over my fence. Another time there was cigarette ash near the deep end, even though I don't smoke. Every time I confronted her, she denied everything instantly. Oh, sweetheart, are you sure that wasn't one of your friends? Or, that's a pretty serious accusation. Or my personal favorite, you can't really prove who's been there. Always smiling when she said it too. That smile started getting under my skin in a way I can't fully explain. It wasn't just arrogance. It was this weird certainty that nobody would ever hold her accountable because she'd spent her whole life talking her way around consequences. Luis kept telling me to just install cameras. Honestly, I should have listened sooner. But part of me still thought this would eventually stop if I ignored it. I didn't want neighborhood drama. I didn't want HOA meetings turning into reality television. I definitely didn't want police cars outside my house because some grown woman didn't understand basic property lines. Then came the 4th of July weekend. And that's when everything changed. 4th of July in our neighborhood always turns into this weird combination of suburban family barbecue and low-budget political campaign rally. Everybody suddenly becomes best friends for 48 hours. Flags everywhere, folding chairs out in driveways, dads burning burgers while pretending they know how to smoke brisket. Usually I liked it. That year, I dreaded it. Mostly because I already had a feeling Candace was going to pull something. The HOA had organized a community block party near the clubhouse that afternoon, and I remember debating whether I should even go. But Luis talked me into it. He said if I stayed locked inside my house all weekend, then Candace basically wins by default. So around 3 o'clock, we walked over together carrying beers in plastic cups like every other guy. They're pretending not to notice the HOA board members policing parking spaces. Candace was already there, of course. She had this way of positioning herself at the center of every conversation without technically saying anything important. Loud laugh, hand on somebody's shoulder, sunglasses pushed up in her hair like she'd stepped out of a commercial for expensive divorce attorneys. A small crowd formed around her constantly, mostly newer residents trying to fit into neighborhood politics. And the second she saw me, I could tell she was about to start something. "Ethan," she yelled across the lawn like we were old friends. I hated that immediately. I gave a polite nod and kept walking, but she intercepted anyway. "How's the famous pool?" Luis almost choked trying not to laugh. I said, "Still attached to my house, last time I checked." A couple people nearby laughed awkwardly because they could feel tension but didn't know the details yet. Candace smiled wider. "You know," she said, "you should really host sometime. It's selfish keeping all that space to yourself." There it was. That word. Selfish. Like privacy was somehow immoral. I said, "Most people call that ownership." For a split second her smile twitched. Tiny thing. Barely noticeable. But it was the first time I realized she didn't actually like being challenged publicly. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "You really should stop making such a big deal over this," she said. "People are starting to think you're unstable." That one landed harder than I expected. Because suddenly it clicked. This wasn't random entitlement anymore. She was building a narrative. I looked around and noticed 2 women nearby pretending not to listen while very obviously listening. Candace had probably already spent weeks planting little comments around the neighborhood. "Poor Ethan seems paranoid lately. He's very sensitive about his property." Stuff like that. Nothing direct enough to call out, just enough to poison the water socially. That's how people like her operate. They don't attack head-on. They manage perception. I said, "You've been trespassing on my property." Still calm. Still controlled. Candace tilted her head. "Can you prove that?" There it was again. That sentence. And this time she said it in front of people. Like she enjoyed it. Luis stepped forward before I could respond. "Actually," he said, "I've seen your car there." Candace didn't even look at him. "Well then maybe you should both get hobbies." Then she walked away laughing. I wish I could tell you I handled that moment like some perfectly composed movie character. Truth is, I was furious. Not loud furious. Quiet furious. The kind where your chest feels hot and your thoughts start racing faster than your mouth can keep up with. Luis pulled me aside. "Bro," he said, "you need cameras yesterday." And for the first time, I agreed. That Monday, I called a security company. Not some giant corporate service either, just a local guy named Warren who specialized in residential systems. Older dude, former military, incredibly calm. He walked my property with me while I explained everything, and halfway through the story, he stopped near the back gate and said something that stuck with me. People test boundaries, he said, and once they realize there's no consequence, they stop seeing your property as yours. Exactly. That was exactly what this felt like. So we went overboard. For hidden cameras covering every angle of the backyard. Motion alerts directly to my phone. Cloud backup storage. Timestamps burned into the footage. One camera disguised inside an outdoor light fixture. Another built into the patio speaker housing. By the end of the afternoon, Warren looked almost impressed. Who exactly are we preparing for? He asked. I remember laughing a little. A woman with too much confidence. Now, technically speaking, the smart thing probably would have been stopping there. Cameras alone would have solved the issue. Catch her once, file a report, done. But by then this had become personal. Not because of the pool. Because of the humiliation. Because every interaction with Candace left me feeling like she thought basic rules only applied to ordinary people. And worse, she genuinely believed she could manipulate everyone around her into agreeing. The die idea actually came from complete accident. About a week later, I was venting to my friend Melanie over drinks downtown. Melanie's one of those terrifyingly intelligent people who somehow knows random facts about everything. Former chemistry teacher, current pharmaceutical rep, sarcastic enough to survive both careers. I was halfway through explaining the situation when she suddenly started laughing into her margarita. What? I asked. She said, you know they make theatrical pool dye for leak detection, right? I blinked. What does that mean? And then she explained it. Certain harmless dye compounds stay nearly invisible in water, but react strongly once transferred onto dry surfaces or certain fabrics. Mostly used for maintenance testing, nothing dangerous. Temporary staining at worst. And immediately my brain started connecting dots. Melanie noticed the look on my face and pointed a finger at me. No crimes, she said. I laughed. No crimes. But the idea stayed with me the entire drive home. Not to hurt her. Not even really to embarrass her. Okay, maybe a little to embarrass her. But mostly because I wanted undeniable proof. Something impossible to gaslight. Impossible to smile away. A visible consequence. The next few days turned into this weird secret operation that honestly makes me laugh now looking back. Here I was, a 38-year-old remote software consultant, researching dye dispersion systems at midnight like I was planning a casino heist. I installed a small timed release cartridge in the pool filter system. Completely harmless. Water safe. Temporary staining designed to fade naturally within about 48 hours depending on skin and fabric type. Then I tested it. On myself. Because contrary to what internet comments usually assume, I'm not an idiot. I stepped into the pool, waited 10 minutes, climbed out. Nothing. For about 30 seconds. Then faint blue footprints started appearing across the concrete. I remember staring down at them thinking, oh, this is either genius or I've officially lost my mind. By Friday night, everything was ready. And that's when the strangest part happened. I started feeling guilty. Not guilty enough to stop, obviously, but enough to question myself. Because deep down I knew this whole situation had stopped being about simple trespassing weeks ago. It had become ego versus ego. Boundaries versus entitlement. Two stubborn people waiting for the other one to blink first. Part of me wondered if I should just file a police report quietly and move on. Then Saturday morning happened. I woke up around 9 and checked my neighborhood Facebook page while drinking coffee. Candace had made a post. Reminder that community spaces should be shared respectfully this weekend. Let's avoid selfish behavior and remember what neighborhood spirit means. No names mentioned. Didn't need to. The comments underneath were full of people agreeing with her. Absolutely. Some residents need to hear this. So true. That's when the guilt disappeared. Completely. Around noon, I intentionally unlocked the side gate. Then I left the house. Or at least I made it look like I did. In reality, I parked 2 streets over and walked back through the trail behind the retention pond until I reached Luis's yard. From his upstairs guest room window, you could see almost my entire backyard through the palm trees. Luis opened the blinds slowly like we were conducting surveillance on a cartel operation. This is insane, he whispered. I said, I know. Then we waited. At first nothing happened. 1 o'clock passed. Then 2. I started wondering if maybe Candace somehow knew. Maybe she'd finally gotten nervous. Then around 2:30 Luis suddenly went, "Oh no, there she is. White SUV. Right on schedule." Candace parked in front of my house like she'd done it 100 times before. And she wasn't alone. She had 4 women with her this time, plus one guy I'd never seen before carrying a cooler over his shoulder like they were arriving at a vacation rental. From Luis's window, we watched them walk straight through my side gate, without hesitating even half a second. That part still blows my mind. No caution. No checking around. No, maybe this is a bad idea. Just complete confidence. Candace stepped into the backyard first, wearing this white cover-up dress over a red swimsuit, giant sunglasses, hair tied up, phone already in her hand, recording little clips for social media. "Oh my God," one of her friends said when they saw the pool. "This place is gorgeous." Candace laughed. "I know, right? He never even uses it." That irritated me more than it should have, because I absolutely used it. Every week. But entitlement has this weird way of rewriting reality around itself. If somebody else isn't using something exactly when you want it, people like Candace start convincing themselves it's wasted. Luis looked over at me. "You recording?" I held up my phone. Every camera feed was running live. Crystal clear. Timestamps in the corner. Motion alerts pinging nonstop. And there she was, fully documented, trespassing with an audience. The smart move would have been walking over immediately and confronting them. But honestly, after weeks of being told I couldn't prove anything, I wanted her comfortable first. I wanted her absolutely certain she'd gotten away with it again. So we watched. For almost an hour. They swam, drank, blasted music through my speakers, took selfies beside the waterfall feature I spent $6,000 installing after my divorce, because apparently emotional coping mechanisms can be tax deductible if you phrase them creatively enough. At one point, Candace actually gave a little tour on camera. "This is basically my favorite hidden spot in the neighborhood," she said, laughing. "My favorite hidden spot." Luis nearly fell out of his chair. The craziest thing was how normal they all acted. Human beings can justify almost anything if the group around them reinforces it. Nobody there seemed uncomfortable. Nobody questioned why they were inside a stranger's backyard using his pool while he wasn't home. Because Candace had normalized it. That's what charismatic people do sometimes. They make bad behavior feel socially safe. Around 4 o'clock, they finally started climbing out of the pool. And that's when the mood changed instantly. One of the women stepped onto the concrete first, looked down, and froze. Bright blue footprints. At first, she just stared in confusion. Then another woman grabbed her arm. "Oh my God, your feet." Within seconds, more marks started appearing. Blue handprints on white towels. Blue streaks down somebody's legs. The guy with the cooler looked at his palms like he'd touched radioactive waste. "What the hell is this?" somebody yelled. Candace climbed out last. And because she'd been in the water longest, the dye hit her hardest. Blue footprints. Blue fingertips. Even the bottom edge of her white cover-up dress started staining electric blue where it brushed against her legs. The panic was immediate. Not dangerous panic. Social panic. The kind that hits people who care deeply about appearances. Everybody started talking over each other at once. "Wash it off. Is this chlorine? My skin's turning blue." One woman ran to the outdoor shower, scrubbing her arms aggressively, while another started Googling symptoms on her phone like she'd contracted medieval plague from a suburban swimming pool. And right in the middle of all that chaos, Candace looked genuinely afraid for the first time since I'd met her. Not because of the dye. Because suddenly she realized she wasn't in control anymore. Luis looked at me slowly. "You are absolutely going to hell," he whispered. "Probably. But not before this next part." I walked across the street, opened my side gate, and stepped into the backyard. Nobody noticed me immediately because they were too busy freaking out. Then Candace turned around. And the second she saw me standing there calmly holding my phone, her entire face changed. Not dramatic movie-style shock either. Worse. Recognition. Like she understood the whole situation at once. I remember speaking weirdly calmly in that moment. "Hey, Candace." Silence. Her friends all turned toward me. One woman was still clutching a blue towel, staring at me like I was some kind of backyard supervillain. Candace tried recovering first. "What did you do?" I shrugged slightly. "Nothing harmful. It fades in about 48 hours. Nobody said anything. I took another step forward. "But thanks for testing the system." That line hit harder than I expected. You could literally see people recalculating their entire afternoon. The cameras. The unlocked gate. The die. The timing. Candace's expression started shifting from anger into something else. Humiliation. And honestly, that almost made me feel bad. Almost. Then she snapped back into defensive mode. You can't do this, she said. I held up my phone. Actually, I said, I can prove exactly what happened. And then I turned the screen toward her. Every angle. Every second. Her entering the property. Her friends following. The drinks. The music. The swimming. The social media videos. All time stamped. Undeniable. Nobody moved. One of the women quietly muttered, Candace, you said he knew. Interesting detail, right? Because apparently Candace had told them I was okay with this. At least partially. And suddenly the group dynamics changed completely. You could feel people distancing themselves from her in real time, realizing they might have walked into somebody else's drama under false pretenses. Candace saw it too. Everybody calm down, she snapped, but now her voice sounded strained. I said, no one's in danger. But all of you are trespassing. The guy with the cooler immediately grabbed his stuff. I'm leaving, he said. Smartest person there. Within 2 minutes, the entire energy collapsed. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody acted confident. They just wanted out. Except Candace. Because people like her never retreat cleanly. They fight reality until the very last possible second. This is harassment, she said. I actually laughed at that. You broke into my backyard. The gate was open. That's not how property works. Her face tightened. Then came the sentence that finally explained everything. You think you're better than everybody else because you have this house. There it was. Not really about the pool. Not really. Candace rented her place. Expensive rental too, but temporary. Meanwhile, I own mine outright after years of grinding through miserable contracts and 80-hour work weeks during my 30s. I never talked about money in the neighborhood because honestly I hate people who do that. But apparently she'd built an entire narrative around me anyway. Quiet guy with a nice backyard. Must think he's superior. Must deserve being taken down a little. And once somebody convinces themselves you're the villain, violating your boundaries starts feeling righteous to them. I looked at her and said something I hadn't planned beforehand. I think everybody deserves boundaries. That shut her up. Not dramatically. Just enough. Her friends started leaving one by one after that. Nobody wanted to stay associated with the situation anymore, especially covered in smooth-colored stains visible from space. Candace lingered longest. Before leaving, she looked back at me near the gate. For a second I thought she might apologize. Instead she said, quietly, you humiliated me. And maybe this makes me a bad person, I don't know. But I answered honestly. No, Candace. You walked into that yourself. Then she left. I wish I could tell you the story ended there all neat and satisfying like a movie. It didn't. Because neighborhoods are ecosystems. Drama spreads fast. By Monday morning, half the community already knew some version of the story. Mostly because one of Candace's friends posted a blurry picture of the blue footprints online trying to joke about it. And the internet immediately did what the internet does best. Memes. People started calling her Avatar Karen. Somebody edited blue footprints into our HOA logo. Even Luis got involved, which definitely didn't help matters. Meanwhile, Candace went completely silent online. Then the legal side kicked in. I filed an official trespassing complaint, mostly to establish documentation in case things escalated further. The security footage made everything pretty straightforward. No ambiguity. No misunderstanding. Even the HOA board couldn't ignore it after seeing multiple members involved in unauthorized property use. About 2 weeks later, Candace quietly resigned from her HOA position. Officially, it was for personal reasons. Sure. A month after that, she moved out entirely. And here's where the story gets complicated for me. Because after all the adrenaline faded, after the neighborhood gossip died down and the jokes stopped circulating, I started asking myself whether I went too far. Seriously. I know most people hearing this story think the ending's hilarious. And part of me agrees. There's definitely a satisfying justice element to it. But another part of me still remembers the look on her face when she realized everyone was staring at her differently. That moment where confidence turned into public humiliation. That sticks with you. Sometimes I sit outside by the pool now late at night and think about how weird modern neighborhoods have become. Everybody smiling at each other during HOA cookouts while secretly competing over status, appearances, control. People building entire identities around perception. And honestly, maybe that's why this whole thing exploded the way it did. The pool was never really the issue. Respect was. Boundaries were. And maybe loneliness too, in a strange way. Because people who constantly need validation usually end up crossing lines just to feel significant inside somebody else's world. I don't know. What I do know is this. Nobody ever used my pool again. But I also keep the gate locked now, even when I'm home. Anyway, I'm curious what you think. Did Candace get exactly what she deserved? Or did I cross a line, turning the whole thing into a public lesson? And if somebody repeatedly violated your space after warning them multiple times, how far would you go before making sure they finally understood the boundary? Let me know in the comments, because honestly, even now, I still go back and forth about it sometimes.